Welcome to our October 2020 Box Lunch Talk. I'm Steve Jakobovic with the Historical Society of Carroll County. And today, Dr. Jesse Glass is our guest speaker, zooming all the way from Japan, where it is 1 a.m. right now. Jesse is a professor and accomplished editor, writer, and artist. He has graciously accepted our invitation to share ghost tales and folklore about Carroll County with us today. As most of you know, Dr. Glass, or Jesse, authored Ghosts and Legends of Carroll County in 1982. It was revised in 98, and he's working on a third revision now. And I'll be providing a more comprehensive introduction in a bit. He certainly deserves it. But first, I want to thank again our partners in making this presentation possible. The Community Media Center, of course, always gets our sincere thanks for their considerable talent and enthusiasm to help us present and record this program. Chrome Creative for their support in creating our online registration form and for our online events calendar. We've muted everyone's audio for today's presentation, but just to make sure there are no disruptions, please turn off your microphone and video. Both toggles are found in the lower left corner of your Zoom screen. Now, since we are recording this talk for future use, we ask that everyone refrain from asking questions until the end of the presentation. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the talk, and I'll provide instructions then. But now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jesse Glass. Jesse is a writer, artist, poet, editor, and retired professor of American literature and history and of comparative literature at Nikkei University in Chiba, Japan. Jesse was raised outside of Westminster, Maryland, and holds degrees from Western Maryland College, Johns Hopkins University, and the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. During his career, Dr. Glass was closely associated with avant-garde periodicals, including Goethe's Notes, Cream City Review, and Die Young. Jesse has a long list of publications. Published works includes of Dr. Glass's poetry include The Passion of Phineas Gage and Selected Poems, The Life and Death of Peter Stubb, and Lexical Obelisk. He's also written on history and folklore of Carroll County, including The Witness, Slavery in 19th Century Carroll County, Maryland, Carroll County Newspaper Wars, Know Nothings, Almshouse Scandals, and the Death of a Civil War Editor, and Ghosts and Legends of Carroll County, as just previously alluded to. So now it is my great pleasure to turn the presentation over to Dr. Jesse Glass, and thank you again for joining us all the way from Japan. It's a pleasure.
Am I on?
Yep, you're on.
Well, okay. It's my great pleasure to be here. Thank you. And I'm so happy to be back back at the Historical Society, which used to be something like my second home. But yeah, I'm gainfully unemployed here, which is really great, and in a suburb of Tokyo. And it's been really quite an interesting existence here. But anyway, we're not going to talk about ghosts of Japan, although there are ghosts here and people who believe in them, but the ghosts and legends of Carroll County. And what I'd like to do is start out with a interesting ghost story. You know, what I've done is I've uncovered lots and lots of new old stuff. And some people like to do things like go out and cut a rug on Saturday night. But what I do is I scan and scan through all these old papers. Feel like I've been walking on my eyeballs for years and years and years. But, you know, it's a bit like fishing. Some days it just goes by and you don't find much. And then suddenly you uncover something that just illuminates all of the things that you've been thinking about. So anyway, here's some illumination. I'm going to read some to you. This is a great ghost story to begin with. And I'd like to start with this, a ghostly story with which to begin. This is from the American Sentinel from November 23rd, 1883. And I thought you would get a kick out of this. One night last week, Mr. Sterner, miller at Freidinger's Mill, while sitting in the mill room reading, was suddenly disturbed by the door opening when a white object entered and walking up to him asked what he was doing. He replied, reading. The would-be ghost told him to continue to inform himself thus, but also said that it would pay him 2 more visits and wanted him to intercede in behalf of a certain person in a business matter that then was quite shaky. After this, the venerable ghost retired, not as hobgoblins generally do, but by walking away as naturally as man generally does. Mr. Sterner says, the first introduction rather frightened him, but the voice and manner soon assured him that the object was an old acquaintance wrapped in a sheet. And the principal factor in the business transaction referred to, although he personated a departed friend of the miller. So how about that real ghost story? Yeah, from 1883. There was a kind of push for the study of folklore at the turn of the century. And this came from the American Folklore Society, which started in the 1890s, I believe, and began to collect folk stories and ghost stories and children's songs and all of those things, because there was a great interest in the folk and in the information and truth that could be derived from common people. And so there was this this push to develop a local knowledge, local wisdom. And of course, this is a very romantic idea. It goes back to the Brothers Grimm and the Germans, who were all interested in the idea of the wisdom of the folk and what the folk had to say. So here was a kind of notice that was sent out from the Maryland Folklore Society and was republished in all the papers in Maryland, and it appeared in as well in the Democratic Advocate newspaper in June 29th, 1901. And it says, we would be pleased to receive from our regular correspondents and readers throughout the county replies to the following questions. Correspondents will give such on a separate sheet and send in with their regular newsletter. When published and placed in a scrapbook, the whole will make a valuable collection for future generations. Carroll County can furnish a large contribution to folklore. Here are what we would like to have answers to. And then it says hints for collecting folklore. And then it gives a long list of all the things that the University of Maryland was looking for their folklore archives. Customs connected with births, courtship, betrothal, marriage, death, etc. Popular games, especially of children and nurses, fairies, dwarfs, hobgoblins, demons, angels, ghosts, vampires, saints, witches, etc. Lucky and unlucky days, lucky and unlucky times, lucky and unlucky events, superstitions connected with sun, moon, stars, wind, storm, and natural objects like jewels, trees, and flowers, witchcraft, magic, black art, evil eye, foretelling the future, popular signs and omens, proverbs, weather sayings, riddles, popular medicine, amulets and charms, love potions, harvest customs, etc., etc., etc. So this is the kind of thing I had in mind when we put together Ghosts and Legends of Carroll County. in 1982. We attempted to sort of arrange it a bit. If you would like to move the slideshow up a little bit to the cover of Ghosts and Legends. This is the 1998 version of it. And it was slightly published in a slightly different version. The cover included some hex flowers, some hex signs, originally from Balst Church. And but this one was a kind of updating of all of that from 1998. And it was dedicated, and here is there they are, Mary Bostwick Shellman and Dorothy Elderdice. And I didn't meet Shellman except in a dream. I had an interesting dream about her in 1982 when we were doing the book. But I did meet and know Dorothy Elderdice and other people like Lillian Shipley, who had lots of information to share at that time. And then, of course, let's drop down. Let's take a look at the table of contents. And you'll see that there are things in there that sort of go along with that list from 1901 from the University of Maryland archive. And so this was a kind of beginning towards a collection of something that might represent Carroll County. One of the things we said at the time was it was important to get these things down, written down, and put in some form because Carroll County was changing so much. And at that time, and I really believe it's changed quite a bit since 1982. So maybe it's a good thing we started this project. Okay, so let's continue here. Next thing I want to talk about is some new ghosts. And so it seems like the 1870s and 1880s was a time of the appearance of new ghosts. And these are ghosts that I think represented the situation that Westminster and Carroll County was in at the time. And so you can imagine this, if you will. You're walking up Main Street in Westminster in 1872. And the first thing that would hit you would be how dark it was, because the lighting was a problem. There were some street lamps, but they were rarely kept up and kept lit for one reason or the other. Many, many complaints about this. So when you're walking up the street, you're kind of walking in semi-pitch darkness. And as you walk up the street, you're walking on sidewalks that are maybe barely existent. And so there you are, let's say, blundering along in the dark with your hands out feeling your way. And then suddenly you feel something that has a warm snout and some ears, and there's a mule. His head is kind of extending over the fence and sniffing you as you go along. Well, that's because Westminster at that time was allowed to, the farmers were allowed to continue their farming along main streets. So there are these wonderful pig pens and turkeys and chickens and cows and horses and all of these animals that break out and walk around in the main street, or sort of are just there being their animal selves. and making animal smells and that sort of thing. So, and also doing things, interesting things to the water table and to the aesthetic sense, if anyone had one, of Westminster existence. And there were people who were not very careful about where they placed their garbage or where they stacked their bricks or whatever. And it was really quite a trial to walk from one end to the other of Westminster. So there you are walking up. Ahead of you is all this darkness and a few fluttering candles or lanterns there on posts. And as you go, you step into the road and suddenly your foot disappears in about a foot deep mud and muck, because there had just been a rainstorm. And there in Westminster, Maryland, with its dirt streets, and usually quite liberally manured by the horses passing up and down, pulling carriages. And once in a while, too, the horses would go crazy and try to kill somebody and would run off, and people would be screaming about, get that horse, catch that horse before it kills somebody. And then there were crazy people racing each other up and down Main Street, and local sheriff trying to catch them and all this sort of thing. So here is this wonderful place you can barely see as you go forward. And there among the shadows of East Main Street up towards the cemetery, you suddenly see two little white bodies. And it's already like 10:30 at night or 11 or 12, and you see two of these little white beings that step onto Main Street or in the vicinity of Main Street from this large area of wooded area, primarily wooded area, that contained an old church, and that was the Union Chapel, and all of these old tombstones. And here were these two young girls dressed in white. Now, who knows what they were up to? But given the situation, given the darkness and the kind of wildness of those times, and you're there straining your eyes and looking, and you see these two young people. So take a look, please. It says, well, in the Democratic Advocate for April 2nd, 1881, which was a very interesting year anyway for the climate, the East End is all agog over stories of the ghosts of two little girls wearing white caps that nightly walk from the cemetery to Main Street. And if the weather is pleasant, they extend their perambulations beyond their ordinary limits. Several people thought they saw them on Monday and Tuesday nights. Interesting, huh? There they are coming out of the old cemetery, 1881. And at least one of them decided to stay in the Shellman House because Paul Reese writes about it. And he says that there was a haunting in the Shellman House. They don't know where this little girl came from. She was dressed in white, and there she was looking out of a window or peering into a bedroom in the Shellman House. So we know where they kind of came from, don't we? And we know that they were kind of twins. We wonder where the other one went. But that's all very interesting. But at least we know the story kind of morphed. It kind of changed this bit of folklore from two young ladies coming out of the cemetery in white to one that happened to take up residence in the Shellman house. And then take a look again. Here's another interesting thing. Mad Dog. Considerable excitement was created on Main Street in the vicinity of the Union National Bank and Coots Hotel. Coots Hotel was the anchor hotel. On last Friday night, by the appearance of a strange dog, evidently mad. Quite a number of dogs were bitten, and though some of them were quite valuable and others highly prized as pets, they were promptly killed. In the uncertain gaslight, the rabid animal escaped to pursue his way, and it is feared to commit further depredations. That, my friend, is a thing of horror, especially if you lived in Carroll County in 1872. The sudden emergence of mad dogs and the unpredictability of them. And of course, mad dogs were always attacking other dogs and attacking horses and biting them in their noses and ankles, attacking livestock. And when they were put down, all of these other animals had to be put down. In fact, there's a cow that was bitten by a mad dog in Carroll County, had to be put down because it exhibited mad cow symptoms. And of course, when people were bitten by these mad dogs, they had to undergo the Pasteur treatment, which is quite onerous, and with injections in the navel and other things. And even that was not a certain success. So with this in mind, and with your walking through all of these hazards in Westminster, Maryland, suddenly there's a dog slipping around there. And you don't know, maybe it's a mad dog or what. But here in the Democratic Advocate for December the 12th, 1874, the latest sensation. This is really quite an interesting ghost. At about the witching hour on Wednesday night, a young man of this city saw, or fancied that he saw, a ball of fire opposite the Methodist Protestant church. Nothing daunted, he approached the strange apparition when it took the form of a dog, and shortly after that of a man. Wishing to be sociable to the stranger, he extended his hand when Irabile Dictu, a handkerchief he held in his hand, was scorched. Okay, so this is another interesting ghost that is totally new to Ghosts and Legends of Carroll County, Maryland. And what, in my mind, it is kind of indicative of what they consider to be the most horrible thing you can imagine. Also, there's this idea of shape-shifting and of people turning into various things. And we come across that form, that kind of thinking, even as early as the story of Lee Master, who was thought to turn into a thing called the snarly yowl, a kind of black dog. And so lots of Carroll County ghosts took the form of dogs or other kinds of animals, which we'll talk about later. That's the latest sensation. So speaking of balls of fire, we have to think about that a minute. Ball lightning was seen in Westminster several times. A very interesting example of that happened at the turn of the century. But here's an interesting sort of story called Under Singular Incident. And once again, this is from the Democratic Advocate of 1872, July 27th. It happened near Finksburg. Singular incident. On the night of Wednesday, the 10th instant, about 9 o'clock in Carroll County, Maryland, while Mr. J. Joseph Gray and lady were driving a buggy on the Westminster Pike near his residence, a ball of fire descended, and as he supposed, struck his foot, which was resting on the step outside the buggy. He felt the concussion, but the ball of fire apparently went beneath the buggy and scattered in sparks for 6 feet beneath and around the vehicle, doing no damage to anything. So, and the original report was the Baltimore County Union paper from Baltimore County. So once again, there's a very interesting thing. Was that a meteor? And if it was, why was it falling from the sky in such a slow way? And et cetera, et cetera. Maryland ghost. Once again, this is a Westminster ghost story about the Toop family. The Toop family, they were African American, and they lived in a place in Westminster that was primarily inhabited by African Americans, called Black Ankle, which is destroyed. There's no Black Ankle anymore. And houses connected with Black Ankle, I think many of them were torn down for the 140 highway. But here are these people who lived in Black Ankle. It says, now here is a ghost, as is a ghost, a man with a red face and curly whiskers, who plays his tricks on the Toop family of Westminster, Maryland. One morning, when the family slept later than usual, a little bell was rung violently and the tableware was tossed from the kitchen into the bedroom. After this, the spirit played mischievous pranks almost every morning. When Mrs. Toop would be spreading the tablecloth, it would be snatched out of her hand, and plates, knives, and forks would be thrown to the floor. One of its favorite tricks was to strip the beds of their covering, and on several occasions, a feather bed was tossed to the floor. There are frequent pulling matches between the mother, the daughter, and the ghost, the latter trying to get possession of sheets and counterpanes as they were spread on the beds. One day, the ghost, seen only by the daughter but heard by the mother, was unusually troublesome. They were hoeing in the garden, and every few minutes they would be stopped in their work and would be unable to raise their hoes from the ground. The mother told the daughter to strike it. The ghost said, "If you strike me, I will be the death of you." She, however, directed a blow at its face and fell down in a fit. Interesting. The girl has spasms nearly every day in which she loses consciousness. These come on whenever she resists the ghost or refuses to obey it. And that was printed in the Cincinnati Daily Star of September 23, 1879. Well, it's interesting because it was commented on by the editor of the Democratic Advocate. He says, The material is too wonderfully scant for a sensation in the tube case. The whole thing is too thin not to be seen through at a glance. And this was in September the 27th, 1879, the Democratic Advocate. So it's kind of interesting because this Vanderforp guy saw himself as a bit of the editor of the Democratic Advocate, saw himself as a bit of a ghostly investigator, perhaps, when he talks about the tooth case. Well, let's continue. So one morning, African-American man was walking, I forget, along the street, one of the back streets, towards the depot, Westminster Depot, and decided, although it was out of the blue, to kill himself. Or at least that was the conclusion of the people who examined the bizarre scene. And when I say bizarre, it was truly a bizarre way to kill oneself. Maybe all suicides are bizarre, I don't know, but this one certainly was. So there he was, dressed up for work. He was heading to work. And he had bent over a tree on one of the streets. It was a kind of young tree, so he could pull it down. And he inserted the branches under his chin, around his throat. And it exerted enough torsion to pick him up so that his feet were just inches above the sidewalk. And he hung there and died. So this was interesting. It was in the paper. And someone decided to, a guy named Francis W. Shriver, who had been a resident of Westminster, wrote from his place his own recollections of something that happened in the Westminster jail. And it gives us an insight into the creation of ghost stories that I would like to, and I found this quite interesting because of that. He's writing from Philadelphia, and his letter is January 15th, 1910. Reading today's Advocate of January 14th, your editorial has the suicide of Charles Gibson, that was the black man's name, reported elsewhere, marked a new era, etc., recalls to memory a very similar incident that happened about 50 years ago. And this happened in the Carroll County prison house. So you might want to advance the slideshow, please, to the picture of the jail, if you would. That's right. And here's a picture of the jail after it was burned down. And the prisoners were removed from that jail. They think the prisoners burnt it up. And this happened in the 1880s. And they were moved to the Olms House, the Carroll County Farm Museum, which also served as a prison for a while. In fact, one of the prisoners who was up for a German, a totally mad German, who had murdered someone, committed suicide. He was supposed to be hung, but he declared that he would never be hanged. He would take care of everything himself. Committed suicide in one of those buildings at the Farm Museum. and using a large butcher knife, and with his own blood, he wrote on the wall verses from the Bible, which he thought maybe the people who found him thought that they were for his epitaph. But anyway, so he was one of the prisoners who was removed from here. Talk about him sometime later. But here it is, reading today's Advocate, et cetera, African-American man by the name of Gibson, and I think his name was Charles, confined to the Westminster jail, committed suicide by cutting a large artery in his arm with a razor and bleeding to death. At that time, suicides were not allowed to be buried in the cemeteries. So Gibson's body was buried in a fence corner on top of Sunset Hill. I believe, maybe I'm wrong and you could correct me, but I believe that Sunset Hill was over in the direction of Balkers. I think that was Sunset Hill. For many years thereafter, our young people were afraid to pass along this road after dark on account of the rumors that Gibson's ghost traveled this road with a razor in his hand. One of the many harmless stories told the boys to keep us at home after dark. Very respectfully, Francis W. Shriver. So ghost stories could be useful in a sense. He was thinking that this was a useful story because it frightened young boys from traveling too far in the dark. The editor adds this information. We thank Mr. Shriver for his letter, which is very interesting. The place and manner in which the Gibson he mentions was buried indicates an aspiring effort to enforce the common law, which requires that one who takes his own life shall be ignominiously buried in a highway, and a stake driven through his body. I think that's so fascinating. And that the editor would know these details, including the fact that a stake had to be driven through the body of a suicide, as if you were dealing with a vampire. The date for this, of course, is January 1910. And it was in once again, the Democratic Advocate. But let's continue. You know, there were several lynchings in Westminster. And early on, back in the 1840s, 1860s, a young man, a black man, was almost lynched on the streets of Westminster. He was the son of another gentleman, a black man, by the name of Nicholas Parraway. And Nicholas Parraway, and the date of this was November 2nd, 1860. It also happened on Sunset Hill, but we won't go into the details of this particular case. Just to say that Mr. Parraway stayed in Westminster for years and years and years. Supposedly he was about 106 when he died. And after the Civil War, and when he got his voting rights, this old man was always one of the first people to vote in the Republican Party. And this was noted by everybody. Why was he one of the first people to vote? Mary Shellman knew him and celebrated him in a poem that Mimi, one of the Historical Society volunteers, lovely, lovely woman, showed me this poem in which Mary Shellman was enthusing about how she would love to have seen all of the things that Mr. Perroway had seen, and how she would have loved to have traveled with him through his life, his long life of service. But I don't think she would have liked it. When Mimi showed me this poem, I was not very interested in it, because here was Mary Shellman speaking from a very nice position in society at that time, talking kindly, of course, about Mr. Perroway, but probably knowing not much about his life. Well, his son never returned to Westminster. Maybe they put him in jail or something. His son was 16, 17 years old. So here's the next ghost. It was the ghost of the probably the most well-known of Westminster's lynchings. Although Westminster has several lynchings, there's another interesting lynching in which Black people lynched one of their own. And that's, or almost lynched, let's put it this way, almost lynched one of their own. And that too is a story into itself. But this is part of the story. I'm not giving all of it, just part. And this is Jordan Davis writing in the Carroll County Times of July 31st, 1942, in his Time Flies column. As soon as it became known that the Mr. Cook had been lodged in jail, the cry, "Lynch him," went up from all quarters. On Monday morning, June 1st, shortly after midnight, a body of about 50 mounted horsemen entered town from Liberty Street. They divided into several groups and went in several directions to guard the streets. They were all heavily armed and masked. The larger group proceeded to the jail, where they called upon Sheriff George Shower to produce the prisoner. This he refused to do. Sheriff Shower pleaded with the men to permit the law to take its course. But the men had laid their plans well and intended to carry them out. Sheriff Shower was held at pistol point while several of the masked riders entered the jail and made off with the prisoner. This was in June of 1885. They proceeded to the quarry of Thomas Stevenson, about 2 miles from Westminster, out the Mount Airy Road. There, Cook was suspended from a white oak tree. A placard had been placed on the body which read, "This man confessed his crime." The community settled down peacefully, it is said, satisfied. County authorities removed the body of Cook that day for burial. As long as that white oak tree stood, it was pointed out to passers-by as a spot where an important event took place. It was said that the ghost of Cook haunted the quarry for years after. So here's another ghost. Here's another ghost. and the creation of a ghost. And of course, connected with some situation. But the community wasn't settled because within a couple weeks of Mr. Cook's lynching, the people of Carroll County offered to lynch someone else. He was not African American. His name was Christ, and he was a criminal. He was a jail robber and a thug, basically. So the sheriff and other people who tracked him down told him to get out of town or they would lynch him. And he got out of town. Okay, let's continue. And this is J. Leland Jordan, who became a kind of expert on Carroll County history. And writing in Carroll Yesteryears, and this is in the Carroll County Times, March 11th, 1948. Appearing in the center spread of the Metro Gravure section of the Baltimore Sun of Sunday last, and this is what Mr. Jordan is saying, was an artist's map portraying some of Maryland's well-known legends. Naturally, the legends of Carroll did not make the grade, and who cares? But there is one that has a particular interest to me. Others may remember it too. Years ago, this legend was just known as the ghost that walks. And it appeared at night in the rear of Oddfellows Hall. In those times, most of the land thereabouts was pasture or truck patches and a cow path run from Main Street on back into the country, sometimes known now as Lincoln Road, etc. This is going back about 90 years. At the time the building was built, in 1857. When I was a youngster and only living 2 doors down from the hall, I was told to listen for the ghost because he was often loudly heard but seldom seen. I wouldn't dare go up Printer's Alley at night, scared to death. They called the street Printer's Alley because the American Sentinel office was on the first floor of the building. Fear gripped me for years because the late Abraham Huber, who was a lawyer and expert in finances, in whose office I used to play, impressed upon me that the ghost would appear periodically. I never forgot it, and sometimes think I hear it even to this day. So, okay, let's talk a bit about one more bit about the jail. So if we could go back again and look at that jail, I'd appreciate it. And then we'll go on to the Opera House. Please go backwards. There you go. Now, if you live in Westminster, you have to know about Reuben. Reuben is the ghost of the Westminster jail. And his particular bailiwick is the 3rd floor. And what he enjoys doing most of all is making big noises. Well, the ghost, Reuben, is named after in the attic of the Westminster jail, someone wrote the name Reuben. And they also thought, people who investigated and found the name Reuben and knew about whatever was happening in that jail, they thought it was the ghost of someone who died there, was executed there in around 1913 or 1914 for the murder of someone. However, What's interesting about this is that I discovered that Reuben dates back much earlier than 1913 or 1914. Here's this interesting bit of information. Explosion at the jail. And this is from March 25th, 1905. What was declared to be an explosion by several persons at the jail occurred about 2 o'clock Wednesday morning. Sheriff Wilson's wife, several of the prisoners, and 2 guests, a lawyer and a clerk at the courthouse, all heard an unusual noise. The sheriff was awakened, and he called his guests. Each declared he heard an explosion, the lawyer alleging that he felt a concussion. So it was a really large boom. The sheriff made a round of the boiler and radiators. All were in good order. He looked around the jail, but no one could be seen or heard. After a pretty general search for the explosion, he retired to bed, but was so thoroughly awake, he did not go to sleep. When the aurora of morn illuminated the oriental horizon, the sheriff arose and began further investigation. In talking with one of the prisoners, the latter informed the sheriff that the noise was upstairs and sounded like someone emptying a bag of coal to the 3rd story. Now, this is Reuben's bailiwick, the 3rd floor of the jail. The sheriff went and there discovered the cause of the explosion. On a wire clothesline had been hung a bag of corn. The string by which it was tied broke, and part of the ears fell to the floor, and the bag with the balance also fell. It was a trying time when the corn fell. Hair stood on end, and surmises of a jail delivery, etc., ran in the minds of the guests, particularly that the prison and the household were thoroughly aroused. One prisoner thought the ghost of a departed prisoner was roaming about the building. This was March 25th, 1905. Reuben, before there was a Reuben in 1905. So I hope you will give that information to the people at the old jail, because that will give them more insight into whatever is happening on the 3rd floor there. Okay, let's continue. So let's go back. We want to talk about the Opera House. So if you could go back, please take us to the Opera House. And we have lots and lots of stories about the Opera House, besides the ghost in the rear, and besides those things. The Opera House was truly the center. It was an interdisciplinary building, and it was the center of Carroll County entertainment. People came from all over to see singers and all kinds of people. Tom Thumb was there, and all of these other interesting. Of course, sometimes they didn't like the people who came. There was a group who came with a panorama based on Paradise Lost by John Milton. And they had everything set up. People had traveled to come in to see this great panorama, pay 25 cents to see it. That's a lot of money. And suddenly the great discovery was there was no gas to illuminate this great illuminated spectacle. So it was a general disappointment, and one that they wrote about quite a bit in the old newspapers. And there was another group called the Hearts of Stone who advertised themselves as a drama group from New York. And so they were not appreciated. Their show was not appreciated when it was given. And I guess it was a show that was filled with all kinds of witty repartee, but it wasn't appreciated by the people from Westminster who decided to stop the show and run these sons of guns out of town. And they did. They did indeed run this group of players out of town. Made sure that they were on their way to another place and never came back to Westminster. This was once again in the 1870s, 1880s. So, but this didn't happen with a remarkable African-American man by the name of Blind Tom. He was what they would call a savant. No, that's not Blind Tom. There he is. He was a savant, meaning that his brain was really very, very developed in many areas. Let's see, let's check what his dates. Yeah, John. Let's check his dates here. He was born in 1849, died in 1908. And he made the fortune of the people who owned him because he was a slave. And he was constantly on tour in the South, and even made it to Washington, D.C. and New York. And he was astonishing because he could sing in several languages and could compose music. And he did. He composed some very interesting music that you can hear on YouTube. He should be celebrated during Black History Months in Carroll County because he came back. He came back. He even went to New Windsor and performed. And people, many, many, many people came to see him because he was so remarkable. His compositions were done intuitively, and they remind me so much of the tonalists and atonalists like Schoenberg and people like that. But he came, was one of the most remarkable guests, but there were other ones, and full regalia productions of the HMS Pinafore using local talents like Mary Shellman and people from her status, alongside of visiting talent from Baltimore and as far away as New York. And if you'll show some of the shots of the performances now, I'd appreciate it. The Opera House. Could you show those pictures? Yes?
We are about 3 minutes from one, or a couple minutes from one. So we are running out of time. No. We're enjoying it so much. It's awesome. But
I want to come back.
Yeah, definitely. We have.
We could do Ghosts and Legends Part 2.
If you want to wrap up with the Opera House, that'd be great. And then we'll have to reserve you. We have to come back soon.
Well, I want to say one last thing about, there's so much more. That was the bad thing about this, is I have so much new information for Ghosts and Legends. It's hard to pick the best things. But I want to recommend to anybody who's looking for a fun thing to do is to look at Seabrook, Mr. Seabrook's earliest writings about zombies inspired movie. And Mr. Seabrook William Seabrook came from Westminster and had some interesting things to say about magic, German magic, German low magic, which is very, very, very common in Carroll County and in the area around Hanover. Next time I come back, I'll talk about that. But there it is, White Zombie. It's really a fun movie. And there's Bela Lugosi is in it. He's the guy who kind of spirits away this young lady and turns her into a zombie. So if you want to have fun, Halloween fun, I recommend it to you. You can find it on YouTube. And
excuse me, Jesse, but
yes.
We're going to play a clip from the movie now. So hold on.
Oh, okay. Hold on to your seats.
And while they're getting that clip up, thank you so much, Jesse. And we definitely will be back. Thank you very much.
Please have me back. I'd love to come back. I have so much more to talk about.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Are you ready?
This is my friend here. There he is. Whoa. Happy Halloween, everybody. Woo. From Tokyo to Carroll County.
Hey, Lynn, I need sharing permissions.
To be a co-host.
What's happening?
I think we're needing to make one of our participants a co-host so he could run the video. Just some technical difficulties. So with Blind Tom, are there any is his music had been recorded, or is there like paper?
Oh yeah,
his or yeah, is
yes.
That? Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, you can find it on YouTube. Just type in, and there's information. You could go to your friendly Wikipedia, and you get lots of information there and lots of references. But yeah, and in fact, the editor of the Democrats, who was a person who was, I would say, pretty much a racist. But he was totally blown away by Black Tom and went back again and again and just was really, really impressed by the incredible gift that he had.
Are we ready for the clip?
Sure.
I'm ready.
Go.
Not getting any sound here.
Mm-hmm. Oh my.
Yeah, there's sound to this.
I'm not getting it either. Well, as we're watching this and
There she is. There's the white zombie now.
yeah.
See how nice she was before. There she goes. Whoa. So it's a gas. It really is a gas. Seabrook was the grandson of the editor of the American Sentinel. So he would come by and help his grandfather edit the American Sentinel in Westminster.
Wow.
He had some very interesting things to say once again about another of his ancestors, a very famous theologian from the von Zinzendorf, the Moravians, and who was also a dabbler in magic, a guy named Bowler. And so Seabrook tells family stories about Bowler as a participant in this kind of low German black magic, if you want to call it that. And we ran out of time. We were going to talk about the Rattlesnake Hill and Union Mills and the search for the silver mine there, and how that involves this kind of folkloristic magic that you can trace back to the Faust books.
Wow, that's awesome. And thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you. We really have to have you back next year.
I want to come
Get us
back.
ready for Halloween. I'll just make one announcement. So we run out of time for Q&A, but to continue with the Halloween theme, on Thursday, October 22nd, which is just this Thursday at 7 p.m., Frank Badovic will speak about the 1938 H.G. Wells War of the Worlds broadcast that frightened millions, has become a Halloween staple, and why it worked and why it's still interesting to us. So I hope everyone signs up on our website. And thank you again, Ms. Dr. Glass, Dr. Glass. Thank you so much. And I think that will do it for us. Thank you. All righty.